Dust rose with every step as the human walked through the barren fields. His boots crunched on the cracked ground, carrying the weight of tools on his back. The air was dry, heavy with silence. No birds, no wind, just emptiness. He wiped the sweat from his forehead and thought about the harvest. Food was running short, and work was getting harder every day. Alone, he kept going, his eyes scanning the land for signs of growth, but all he saw was endless dust. Then he heard it, a weak sound, almost like a whisper carried by the wind. He stopped, frozen, his heart beating faster. He thought maybe it was just his tired mind playing tricks, but then it came again, a faint cry. His hand instinctively moved to the knife on his belt. Out here, strange things happened. He walked slowly, each step cautious, until he saw a figure collapsing onto the dirt. It was a woman, but not human. Her skin shimmered faintly in the harsh sun, almost pale silver, and her thin frame looked ready to break. Her arms clutched two small bundles. Children, no doubt. The little ones were so weak their eyes barely opened, their small hands limp against her chest. The woman's knees dug into the dust as she struggled to raise her head. Her lips cracked as she forced words out. "Take me as a worker. Just save my children." The human froze, staring at her. He had seen aliens before. Traders, soldiers, wanderers, but never one like this. She was broken, desperate, trembling with exhaustion. The children looked half dead, their ribs showing through thin skin, their faces pale with hunger. His throat tightened, but his instincts screamed caution. This could be a trick. He had heard of alien clans using sympathy as a weapon. But when he looked into her eyes, all he saw was raw fear and pain. Her body swayed as if she might fall face first into the ground. She pressed the children closer, whispering something in her own tongue before switching back to broken human speech. "Work? I work. Fields, house, anything. Please, my children." The human took a step closer, and the stench of hunger and sickness hit him. The children whimpered, too weak even to cry properly. One of them tried to move his tiny hand, but it dropped like a stone. The man felt a knot twist in his chest. He remembered nights when he too had gone without food, back when the war had ruined everything. He remembered his own sister, crying herself to sleep from hunger. That memory was enough to shake him, but he didn't let it show on his face. "Why me?" he muttered. His voice was low, rough. "Why come to me?" The woman blinked, struggling to understand, then whispered, "Others chase us away. Say, no food, no mercy. Only you now." Her voice broke, and tears mixed with the dust on her cheeks. She lowered her head to the ground, pressing her forehead into the dirt as if bowing to him. The children clung weakly to her, too tired to even understand what was happening. He stood there, silent, the sun beating down on his shoulders. Logic told him to walk away. He had his own problems, his own hunger to fight. Taking them in meant sharing what little he had. It could mean starvation for all, and yet, turning his back now felt impossible. Her words echoed in his mind, heavy and sharp. "Take me as a worker, just save my children." His eyes went to the children again. Their breaths were shallow, their small chests rising and falling as if each breath was a battle. If he walked away, they would not survive another hour. He cursed under his breath, feeling trapped by his own heart. He hated how soft it made him feel, but he could not deny what he saw. The woman tried to rise again, but her legs gave way. She fell forward, the children slipping in her arms. Quickly, the human rushed forward and caught one of them before the child's head hit the ground. The boy, or maybe a girl, he couldn't tell, was frighteningly light, like holding nothing but bones wrapped in thin skin. The child's eyes half opened, staring at him without focus, then closed again. He looked at the mother. She lifted her head slowly, her eyes meeting his. Hope flickered there, fragile and trembling like a candle in the wind. She whispered again, almost too soft to hear, "Please." The human clenched his jaw. His mind screamed at him to be smart, to stay alive, to protect himself first. But something deep inside him, something he thought long buried, pushed stronger than fear. He knew what he had to do. With a sharp exhale, he reached down and helped the woman to her feet. She swayed, almost collapsing again, but he steadied her with one hand while holding the child with the other. "Come," he said, his voice hard but not unkind. "I'll take you to my shelter. But you work, understand? Work, and they eat." The woman's lips trembled as she nodded again and again, tears spilling freely now. "Yes, work, anything. Thank you." Her voice cracked, But there was life in it for the first time. He glanced back toward the horizon, half expecting trouble to follow them, but saw nothing but endless dust and rock. Still, he felt uneasy. Saving them might have just painted a target on his back. But it was too late to turn back now. He adjusted his grip on the child, then motioned for her to follow. The other child stirred weakly against her chest, and she tightened her hold protectively. As they started walking, the silence stretched between them, heavy and full of unspoken fear. The human could feel the weight of responsibility settling onto his shoulders. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but one thing was certain: his life had just changed. Somewhere in his chest, beneath the caution and the doubts, burned a small fire. He was no longer alone, and whether he liked it or not, he had just made a choice that would decide all of their fates. The small shelter stood at the edge of the barren land, built from wood, scrap metal, and stone. It was not much, but for the human, it was home. He pushed the door open and guided the alien mother inside. She clutched one child close to her chest while the human still carried the other in his arms. The air inside was cooler than outside, shadows wrapping them as if offering a little protection. The woman's tired eyes darted around, scanning the shelves, the tools, the small bed in the corner, and finally the pot on the table that still smelled faintly of food. Her children stirred, their empty stomachs making weak sounds that were closer to whimpers than cries. The human laid the frail child gently on a blanket near the fire. His face tightened as he saw how fragile the little one was. Their limbs looked thinner than sticks, their lips cracked, their breaths shallow. The mother lowered herself carefully beside them, her own body trembling with exhaustion. For a moment, she just stared at him, as if unsure if this kindness was real or just another dream before death. He turned away without speaking and went to the pot. He took out what little stew was left from his meal, a thin mixture of grain and roots, and filled a small bowl. It wasn't much, barely enough for one, but he carried it over to the mother and placed it in front of her. Her silver eyes widened as if she had been handed treasure. "Food," she whispered, almost in disbelief. She quickly dipped her fingers in, scooping small amounts and placing them into her children's mouths first. They swallowed weakly, their tiny bodies twitching as taste and warmth touched them. She fed them slowly, carefully, until their heads rested back, their breathing a little stronger than before. Only then did she lick her own fingers to take the last drops of stew. Her eyes filled with tears that left pale streaks on her dusty face. "Thank you," she said in broken words. "You saved them." The human said nothing, though inside his chest something twisted. Watching the children eat felt both painful and relieving. He had not planned for this. His food supply was low already. Every bite given to them meant less for him. But as he watched their small hands clutch faintly at their mother's arm, he knew he couldn't have done otherwise. He set his jaw and walked back to the shelves, pretending to be busy. The silence stretched until the woman spoke again, her voice fragile. "We, from clan," she said slowly, searching for the right words. "Clan, no food. Leaders say too many mouths. Weak, sent away." Her eyes dropped to the ground. "Me and children, burden. They push us out. No mercy." Her hands trembled as she smoothed her daughter's hair. "We walk many days. No eat, no water. I think they die. I beg you, before end." The human listened in silence. He had heard rumors before of alien tribes discarding their weakest when famine struck. It was brutal, but not surprising. He clenched his fists at the thought of leaders who would abandon a mother with her children to starve in the dust. Yet he also understood the harshness of survival. Still, the sight of those little ones struggling to breathe felt like a wound inside him. The woman looked up at him, her eyes desperate but honest. "I work. You give them life. I give you all work. Fields, stones, clean, carry, anything." Her words stumbled, but the meaning was clear. She was offering herself as a servant, even as a slave, if it meant her children would live. She lowered her head, ashamed, her silver hair falling like a curtain over her face. No pride, only children. Only them. He studied her for a long moment. Her shoulders were thin, her hands calloused, her arms scarred from hard labor. This was not a princess or a warrior. This was a mother who had already given everything she could and was ready to give more. He felt the old weight of loneliness press against him, reminding him how long it had been since he had spoken to anyone with such raw need in their voice. Against his better judgment, he asked, "What about their father?" Her eyes closed. A deep silence filled the room. Finally, she shook her head. Gone. War. Never return. Only me now. She pressed her lips to her children's foreheads and whispered something in her own language that sounded like a lullaby, though her voice was cracked and weak. The human turned back toward the fire. He poked the embers, watching sparks rise. He thought about his own past, the war that had left him stranded, the family he had lost, the endless years of silence. He had built this shelter with his own hands, survived with his own strength. He had told himself he needed no one. Yet now, in front of him, was a broken family asking for his protection. He hated how much it reminded him of everything he had once loved and lost. The mother shifted uncomfortably on the floor, unsure of what he was thinking. Fear grew in her eyes again. She thought maybe he would send her away now that her children had eaten. Her lips parted to plead again, but before she could speak, he placed another log on the fire and said in a low voice, "Rest. They're safe here tonight." Her mouth opened, then closed again, unable to find words. She bowed her head, clutching her children closer, and whispered, "Safe." The relief in her tone was so deep it nearly broke him. As the night stretched on, the children fell asleep, their small chests rising a little steadier. The woman stayed awake, her back against the wall, her eyes watching the human as if afraid he might vanish if she blinked. He sat silently, sharpening his blade, his face hard, but his thoughts restless. He knew tomorrow would not be easy. Food was short. People would ask questions if they saw aliens living under his roof. Yet when he looked at the fragile shapes sleeping by the fire, he knew he had already made his choice. He would not let them die. For the first time in a long while, he was not alone in the silence of his shelter. And for the alien mother, for the children who had almost slipped away, the night was the first time in many days that hope had not seemed like a lie. The first light of morning touched the shelter, slipping through the cracks in the wooden walls. The human was already awake, moving quietly as he checked his tools. The mother stirred from her corner, her eyes opening slowly. For a moment, confusion passed across her face, as if she feared yesterday had been only a dream. But when she looked beside her and saw her children sleeping, their breath steadier than before, her heart eased. They were still alive. She closed her eyes for a brief second, whispering a prayer in her own language. The human placed a small cup of water in front of her. She looked at it as though it was more precious than gold. She let the children sip first, their tiny mouths taking small gulps. Their weak hands clutched the cup, desperate but careful not to spill. She drank the last drops, wiping her lips and bowing her head slightly toward the man. "Thank you," she whispered. "Work," he said simply, his tone firm but not cruel. "You said you'll work. Let's see what you can do." She nodded quickly, rising to her feet. Her legs wobbled, but determination burned in her eyes. She placed the children back onto the blanket, covering them with cloth, and followed him outside. The fields stretched far, dry and lifeless, with only a few patches of stubborn green fighting to survive. Tools lay scattered, heavy and rough. The human picked one up and pointed to a row of hardened soil. "Dig. Break the ground. Make it soft. Roots can't grow in stone." She knelt without hesitation and began to work. The tool was almost too heavy for her thin arms, but she lifted it again and again, striking the dry earth until it cracked. Sweat dripped down her face, mixing with dust, but she did not stop. Her hands blistered quickly, yet she clenched her jaw and kept going. The human watched silently. He had expected her to complain, to collapse, but she worked with the desperate strength of someone who had nothing left to lose. Hours passed. The sun rose higher, burning down on their backs. At last, he called out, "Enough!" She dropped the tool, her body trembling, but when she looked at the ground, she saw a row of earth loosened and ready for planting. Her chest lifted with a small sense of pride. She turned her head to see him, searching his face for judgment. He gave a short nod. "Not bad." She exhaled deeply, lowering her head in thanks. "More," she whispered, pointing at another patch of land. He raised an eyebrow, but gave her another tool. "If you break yourself, you're no use to anyone," he muttered. But still, he allowed her to continue. When the sun was at its highest, he brought out bread, hard and rough, but food. He broke it into pieces, handing some to her. She didn't eat right away. Instead, she ran inside to her children and fed them first. Only when they had chewed and swallowed did she allow herself a small bite. The human noticed. He said nothing, but the sight carved itself into his thoughts. By evening, she had done enough work to cover almost 2 fields. Her arms shook, her skin burned, her breath ragged, yet she still tried to lift the tool once more. He stepped forward and pulled it from her hands. "Enough?" he said firmly. She stared at him, frightened he might be angry, but he only placed a hand on her shoulder for a brief moment. "You worked well. Rest now." Tears welled in her eyes, but she quickly brushed them away. She bowed her head and whispered, "I will not fail. I will never stop." He turned away, pretending not to notice the emotion in her voice. That night, the children ate more. Their eyes opened wider, their faces not as pale. They even smiled faintly when their mother hummed a soft lullaby. She looked across the fire at the human. "They live because of you," she said quietly. Her voice carried no weakness, only truth. He frowned, uncomfortable with the weight of her gratitude. "They live because you worked," he replied. But in his heart, he knew it was more than that. Days passed and routine formed. At sunrise, she worked the fields, carried stones, repaired the fence, even cleaned the shelter. She moved with tireless resolve, though her body often betrayed her with weakness. The children grew stronger each day, though they still needed care. Sometimes, while she worked outside, the human watched over them, making sure they didn't wander too far or hurt themselves. The first time she saw him do this, her eyes filled with something like relief, or maybe trust. But not everyone saw it the same way. When he went to trade supplies in the nearby village, whispers followed him. "You're keeping outsiders," one man muttered. Another shook his head. "Aliens bring trouble. You'll regret it." The human ignored them, his face like stone, but inside he felt unease. The mother noticed his silence when he returned. She asked no questions, but she could read the tension in his shoulders. She knew the danger was not over. One evening, as the children slept, she sat by the fire and looked at him. "Others hate us," she said softly, almost as if she was ashamed. "They see us as weak, a burden. But you let us live." Her silver eyes met his. "Why?" He hesitated, staring into the flames. His hand tightened around the cup he was holding. Finally, he said in a low voice, "Because I've seen hunger. I know what it does. I won't watch it again." His voice carried a weight she could not fully understand, but she nodded, accepting it. The bond between them grew in silence, forged not by words, but by survival. She worked harder each day, and he found himself giving small pieces of advice: how to angle the tool, how to save strength, how to carry more without breaking her back. She listened carefully, learning quickly, eager to prove her worth. But in the shadows of her determination, he could see fear. Fear that one day he might change his mind. Fear that her children might be cast out again. And deep inside he feared something too, that keeping them might bring a storm upon his head. Still, when he looked at the children smiling faintly by the fire, or when he saw her hands bleeding but refusing to stop, he knew the storm was already coming, and he also knew he would not turn his back. The evening was quiet, the kind of silence that usually meant peace. The human sat, sharpening his blade near the fire, while the alien mother softly hummed to her children. The small ones were finally strong enough to sit up and play with wooden scraps he had carved for them. For the first time in many nights, laughter, soft and weak, floated inside the shelter. The human glanced at them and almost smiled, though he quickly hid it behind his rough expression. But deep inside, he felt something he hadn't in a long time: warmth. That warmth shattered when a shadow passed across the window. His hand froze on the blade, his instincts sharpening like the steel in his grip. He rose slowly and stepped outside. The air was heavy, colder than usual. He scanned the horizon and caught sight of movement near the distant rocks. Dark figures stood against the dying light of the sun, watching. Even from far away, he recognized them, the alien tribe, the same tribe that had cast out the mother and her children. He stayed still, his eyes narrowing. They had found her. Inside, the mother's voice faltered. She had felt the shift in the air, the sudden stiffness in the human's shoulders when he returned. She put her children to bed early, but when she turned, she found him standing near the door, his face grim. "They're here," he said simply. Her breath caught in her throat. Her legs weakened, and she leaned against the wall. She didn't need to ask who. She knew. The tribe. The same people who had looked at her children with cold eyes and thrown them out like waste. Her hands trembled as she whispered, "No, they come to take us, to kill them." The human's jaw tightened. "Maybe," he muttered, "but they won't get you while you're under my roof." Her eyes widened. "You don't understand. They hate weakness. If they see me alive, they think shame. They erase shame. They kill it. You must send us away before they destroy you too." He looked at her sharply. "You think I saved your children just to throw them out now? No. If they want you, they'll have to go through me." Tears welled in her eyes, but she shook her head, desperate. "They are many. You are one." "I've stood against many before," he replied coldly. But the flicker in his eyes betrayed that he knew the risk. The next day, they worked as usual, but tension hung in the air like a storm about to break. Every rustle of wind, every echo from the hills, made her flinch. She kept her children close, hardly letting them out of her sight. At night, she didn't sleep, sitting awake and staring at the door, listening for footsteps. The human noticed. He didn't scold her. He simply sharpened his weapons, checked his traps, and doubled the firewood pile. On the third night, the warning came. A stone landed near the shelter, wrapped in cloth. When he picked it up and unrolled it, crude markings told the message: "Return the outcasts, or burn with them." He showed it to her. Her face drained of color, and she sank to her knees. Her voice broke as she whispered, "I told you. They won't stop. They will kill you if you stand with me." He crouched in front of her, gripping her shoulders firmly. "Listen to me. I don't care what they want. You are under my protection now. Your children are under my protection, and I don't break my word." His voice was steady, iron hard. Her eyes searched his face, desperate for even the smallest crack in his resolve. But all she found was steel. Slowly, she lowered her head, tears falling silently. "Then I stand with you, even if I die." The days that followed were filled with unease. She worked harder than ever, as if each swing of the tool was a prayer for strength. The human prepared quietly, digging shallow defenses around the shelter, setting hidden traps and stacking extra supplies. The children sensed the change, their laughter fading as they clung to their mother's side. Nights became long stretches of fear. Sometimes the mother whispered lullabies not to soothe her children, but to keep her own terror at bay. One evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, she finally told him what he had suspected. "When they cast us out, they said words. Words that mean curse. Anyone who helps us. They will punish too. To them, you are now cursed." Her voice shook. "If you fight for us, they will not just kill you. They will make example of you." The human stared into the fire, his face unreadable. At last, he said quietly, "Let them try." She looked at him for a long moment, her chest tight with both fear and gratitude. She could not understand why he would risk so much for strangers. He could have sent them away the first night. He could still send them away now. Yet he stayed, and because of that, she stayed too. That night, sleep finally claimed her, but the human remained awake. He sat by the door, blade across his knees, eyes fixed on the darkness outside. In the distance, faint howls and chants echoed from the rocks. The tribe was close. The storm was coming, and deep inside, he knew this was no longer just about sheltering a mother and her children. This was about something bigger, about proving that humanity meant more than survival, that compassion was worth fighting for, even against impossible odds. When dawn came, the first rays of light revealed fresh tracks near the fields. They had circled the shelter in the night, testing his defenses. Soon, they would come in full force. The children ran to him, frightened, clinging to his leg. The mother stood behind them, her face pale but her eyes blazing with fierce determination. For the first time, he saw not just a desperate beggar, but a mother ready to fight for her children with her last breath. The human tightened his grip on his blade and looked at the horizon where shadows gathered. He had faced battles before, but this one was different. This one was not for land, not for power, not for survival of himself alone. This was for them, for the children. And as the wind carried the first war cries from the tribe, he whispered under his breath, "Let them come." The morning air was heavy with silence. The human stood outside the shelter, his blade strapped to his side, his eyes fixed on the horizon. He could feel it in his bones. The tribe was coming. Every instinct from years of survival told him that today would not pass quietly. Inside, the alien mother tried to keep her children calm, whispering to them as she pressed them close. But her voice trembled, betraying her fear. She could not hide it, not from herself, not from him. Then it happened. Shapes began to appear across the rocky field. At first, only a few, then more, until a group of nearly a dozen figures stood in the distance. Their bodies were taller, heavier than the mother's, their armor made of scraps of bone and metal. Each carried a crude weapon, clubs, spears, jagged blades. They walked slowly but with confidence, like hunters closing in on prey. The human stood firm, refusing to step back. The leader of the tribe stepped forward, his skin a darker shade of silver than the others, his eyes burning with scorn. He raised his spear and pointed it toward the shelter. "Outcast," he shouted in his own tongue, his voice carrying across the field. The mother flinched when she heard it. She knew what would follow. The leader barked again, switching to broken human speech. "Give them back. Woman, children, weak, belong to us." The human narrowed his eyes. His voice was steady when he answered. "They don't belong to you. Not anymore. You threw them away. You said they were nothing. But here, they live. And here, they stay." A ripple of anger ran through the tribe. Some raised their weapons, shouting curses. The leader snarled, his teeth bared. "You choose death, human. For them. For you. We take back shame. We burn it clean." Inside the shelter, the children began to cry softly, sensing the danger outside. The mother rushed to them, whispering words of comfort she barely believed herself. Her hands shook as she tucked a blanket around them. Her heart pounded as she heard the clash of voices growing louder outside. She wanted to run out, to throw herself before the tribe and beg, but her feet refused to move. Fear gripped her like chains. The human drew his blade slowly, the metal glinting in the pale sun. He stepped forward, planting himself between the tribe and the shelter. His voice rang out like steel. "If you want them, you'll have to go through me." For a moment, silence fell. The tribe looked at him as though he was mad. One man against many. One human standing before warriors. They laughed, but there was no joy in their laughter. It was sharp, cruel, mocking. The leader spat on the ground and shouted a single word. "Attack." The first warrior charged, his club raised high. The human moved like a shadow, sidestepping and slashing in one smooth motion. The club fell to the ground with a thud, and the warrior collapsed with a cry. Gasps rose from the tribe, their mocking smiles wiped away. The human did not look at the fallen body. His eyes stayed locked on the next. More came. 2, then 3 at once. Blades flashed, spears thrust forward. The human ducked low, the sound of air hissing past his ear as a spear missed him by inches. He slammed his shoulder into one attacker, sending him sprawling, then cut down another with a swift strike. Dust rose around them, by the clash of steel and cries of rage filling the air. Inside the shelter, the mother could not sit still. She opened the door and saw the human fighting like a storm, his movements sharp, calculated, filled with a deadly purpose. Her heart leapt in terror and awe. She grabbed a broken piece of wood and ran to the field. The children screamed for her, but she could not watch him stand alone. The leader noticed her. His eyes burned with fury. "Outcast woman!" he roared. He raised his spear and rushed at her. She froze for an instant, the weight of fear crushing her chest. But before the spear could strike, the human was there. He blocked the attack, sparks flying as blade met metal. He shoved the leader back and barked at her. "Stay with the children." Her eyes filled with tears, but she obeyed, running back to the shelter. She clutched her children close, praying for a miracle. Outside, the fight raged. The human's arms ached, his breath came hard, but he stood his ground. Every time a warrior fell, another took his place. Still, he did not waver. He was outnumbered, but not outmatched. His blade was an extension of himself, his will unbreakable. For every strike they gave, he answered with sharper fury. The leader snarled, frustrated at the losses. He raised his voice to the others. "Burn it! Burn the shelter!" 2 warriors broke away, running toward the small home. The mother screamed, throwing herself against the door to block it. She grabbed a stone from the ground and hurled it at one of them, hitting his shoulder. It barely slowed him. He raised his torch, ready to set the dry wood aflame. But the human was faster. He spun, his blade cutting the torch from the warrior's hand, sparks scattering uselessly on the dirt. With a powerful strike, he dropped the second one before he reached the door. He planted himself in front of the shelter, his chest heaving, his eyes blazing. "You won't touch them." For the first time, doubt crept into the tribe's faces. This human was not breaking. He was not bending. He fought with a fire they had never seen, a fire that came not from survival alone, but from something deeper. The leader hissed, rage twisting his face. "You will die, human, but first, we make you watch." The human tightened his grip on the blade. His body was weary, but his spirit burned hotter with every threat. He looked back at the door of the shelter, where the mother and her children watched with wide, terrified eyes. For them, he thought, for them, I stand. And with a roar that shook the field, he charged forward to meet the tribe head-on. Dust filled the air as the battle spread across the barren field. The human's blade flashed again and again, striking down enemies with a precision born from years of survival. His muscles burned. His breath came heavy, but he refused to slow. Every time his arms felt like they might fail him, he looked back at the small shelter. He could see the faint glow of the fire through the cracks, and he knew the mother and her children were inside, waiting for him. That thought gave him strength he didn't know he still had. The tribe pressed harder. Their leader shouted commands, furious that so many of his warriors had already fallen. Two more rushed at the human from opposite sides, hoping to trap him. He pivoted, raising his blade in a tight arc that deflected one spear while his elbow smashed into the other's jaw. Both stumbled, and before they could recover, he struck fast, ending them in the dust. Blood stained the ground, mixing with the dry soil. Inside, the children cried as the noise of battle shook the walls. The mother held them tight, whispering over and over, "He fights for us! He fights for us!" But her own heart pounded with dread. She could not just sit there. She picked up a sharp piece of broken pottery and crept toward the door. Her instincts screamed to protect her children, yet her soul could not bear to watch him die alone. When she stepped outside, the sight froze her. The human stood surrounded, his chest rising and falling like a drumbeat, his blade covered in dust and blood. Bodies lay scattered around him, yet still the tribe circled, their eyes glowing with hatred. The leader raised his spear high and pointed it at the human. "End him!" They came all at once, 4, then 5, rushing together in a furious wave. The human braced himself, his grip tightening. He ducked low, slashing upward to cut one down, twisting aside to block another. A spear grazed his shoulder, tearing through his shirt and drawing blood, but he ignored the pain. He kicked one warrior hard in the chest, sending him crashing into another, then spun to face the last two. His body screamed with exhaustion, but his spirit roared louder. The mother saw the wound on his arm, blood soaking into the cloth, and fear clenched her throat. She raised the pottery shard and ran forward, stabbing it into the side of a warrior who had crept behind the human. The warrior howled in pain and stumbled, giving the human just enough time to finish him. He turned sharply, his eyes locking on her. For a moment, anger flashed. He wanted her safe inside. But when he saw the fire in her eyes, the way she stood with trembling hands but unbroken will, he only gave a short nod. They were fighting together now. The tribe leader growled, furious. "You shame us more with every breath," he spat, pointing his spear directly at the human. "This ends now," he charged, his heavy steps shaking the ground. His spear shot forward like a bolt of lightning. The human raised his blade, metal clashing with a spark. The force of the strike pushed him back, his boots digging into the dirt. The leader was stronger than the others, his strikes wild but full of brute power. Blow after blow rained down, each one harder than the last. The mother cried out, trying to distract the leader, but he shoved her aside with the shaft of his spear, sending her sprawling to the ground. The children screamed from the doorway. The human's rage ignited. With a roar, he twisted, forcing the spear away, and slammed his shoulder into the leader's chest. Both men fell to the ground, wrestling in the dust. The spear clattered away as they grappled, fists striking, dirt flying. The leader clawed at the human's face, his teeth bared like an animal. The human grunted, forcing his knee into the leader's stomach. He reached for his blade, but the leader's hand grabbed his wrist, stopping him. Their eyes locked, fury against fury, strength against strength. For a moment, it seemed either one could win. Then, with a burst of desperate strength, the human twisted free and drove the blade forward. The leader gasped, his mouth opening in shock. His body stiffened, then went limp. The human shoved him aside, chest heaving, blood and sweat dripping down his face. Silence fell across the field. The remaining warriors froze, their eyes wide. Their leader lay in the dirt, defeated by a single human. The mother staggered to her feet, staring in disbelief. The children peeked from the doorway, their eyes wide with wonder. The tribe warriors muttered among themselves, their courage broken. Without their leader, they were lost. One by one, they backed away, their steps unsteady. None dared face the human again. Within moments, they turned and fled into the hills, their shouts fading into the distance. The human stood in the middle of the field, his blade hanging at his side, his chest rising and falling heavily. His body ached, his wounds burned, but he was still standing. He looked at the shelter, at the mother and children watching him, and for the first time, he allowed himself a breath of relief. The mother ran to him, her hands trembling as she touched his wounded shoulder. "You saved us," she whispered, her voice breaking. Tears streamed down her face. "You stood against them all. They feared you." She pressed her forehead against his chest, sobbing. The children rushed forward too, clinging to his legs, their small voices crying out his name. He stood stiffly, unsure how to respond. He had fought for survival many times before, but this was different. He had not fought for himself. He had fought for them. And in their eyes, he was not just a fighter. He was their protector, their shield against a world that had cast them aside. The fire of battle still burned in his chest, but alongside it grew something new, something he had long forgotten, belonging. He had carried them this far, and now they looked at him not as a stranger, not as an outsider, but as the center of their fragile hope. The mother's voice shook as she whispered again, "We are alive because of you." And as the wind carried away the last echoes of the fleeing tribe, the human knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The battlefield was quiet now. Only the sound of the wind moved across the dry earth, carrying with it the faint smell of blood and dust. The human stood with his blade still in hand, its edge stained, his chest rising and falling with the weight of exhaustion. Around him lay the scattered bodies of the tribe's warriors, and further away, the shadow of their leader who would never rise again. For the first time since the fight began, there was no movement, no shouting, no threat. The silence felt heavy, but also final. The mother walked slowly toward him, her steps unsteady. Her children clung to her sides, their small hands gripping her clothes tightly. She looked at the man who had stood alone against her tribe, the man who had risked everything for her and for her children. Her throat ached as she tried to speak, but only a whisper came. "It is over." The human finally lowered his blade, planting its point into the ground. He leaned on it for a moment, his body aching, but his eyes never left the mother and her children. "For now," he said quietly, "they may return, but not today." The children ran forward and clung to his legs. Their eyes were wide, full of awe and relief. They were too young to understand the full weight of what had happened, but they knew one thing clearly. He had saved them. They pressed their faces against him, and for the first time since he had found them in the dust, their smiles were real. The mother dropped to her knees before him. Her silver hair fell around her face as tears streamed down her cheeks. "You did not just fight for us," she whispered. "You gave us life again. No one has ever done this for me. No one." The human looked down at her, his jaw tight. He was not used to praise. He was not used to being needed. For so long, his life had been only about survival, his own hunger, his own pain, his own lonely days. But now, looking at her bowed head and the children clinging to him, he felt something new, something heavier than duty and sharper than pride. It was responsibility. It was belonging. He reached down and helped her to her feet. "Stand," he said firmly. "You don't bow to me. You are their mother. That is enough." Her eyes lifted, meeting his, shining with gratitude. She held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Her voice was soft but certain. "Then from this day, we are yours. My hands, my work, my life, their lives, all bound to you." The words struck him deeply. He had not asked for this, had not planned for it, but he could not deny the truth of what she said. In the eyes of her tribe, she had been cast out as worthless. But here, standing before him, she was offering him not servitude but loyalty, the kind of loyalty born from survival and trust. He felt the weight of it settle on his shoulders like armor. The group returned to the shelter. The human's wounds were cleaned clumsily by the mother, her hands trembling as she tied strips of cloth around his shoulder and arm. She whispered apologies each time he winced, but he only shook his head. "I've had worse," he muttered. The children watched silently, their eyes never leaving him. They had no words, but the way they leaned against him, the way they refused to let him out of sight, said everything. That night, the fire burned warmer than before. The family, because now it felt like a family, sat together. The mother sang softly in her language, her voice broken but soothing. The children fell asleep quickly, their small breaths even and peaceful. The human sat across from her, sharpening his blade again out of habit, though his mind was far away. He thought about what tomorrow would bring. He thought about the whispers in the village, the eyes that would look at him with suspicion. He knew danger was not over. But when he looked at the mother, sitting close with her children in her arms, he knew he would not turn away. Hours passed, and finally she spoke again. Her voice was quiet, almost fragile. "When they cast us out, I thought the world ended. I thought my children would die in the dust. But you saw us. You gave us food, shelter, hope. You gave me reason to breathe again." She paused, her eyes glistening. "I cannot repay what you have done, but I swear, until my last breath, I will stand by you." The human's eyes softened, though his voice remained firm. "Then live. That's repayment enough." A silence settled between them, but it was no longer heavy. It was warm, filled with understanding. For the first time in many years, he did not feel alone. When dawn came, the world looked different. The field stretched wide, still dry, but no longer hopeless. The mother rose early, already taking tools to the soil. Her children helped in small ways, carrying water, placing seeds where she pointed. The human stood for a moment, watching them. A strange feeling stirred inside him, one he had almost forgotten: home. He joined them, working side by side. The children laughed when he lifted heavy stones as if they weighed nothing. The mother's eyes followed him, her expression soft, her heart heavy with gratitude. Together they worked until the sun was high, and for once, it did not feel like a fight for survival. It felt like the start of something new. By evening, as the fire crackled again, the human sat with the children resting against his side, their heads heavy with sleep. The mother sat across from him, her silver hair glowing in the firelight. She looked at him with quiet certainty. "You didn't just save us," she said. "You gave us a future." He didn't answer right away. He only stared into the flames, his hand resting on the child sleeping against him. Finally he spoke, his voice steady but softer than usual. "Then let's make it a future worth living." Outside, the wind carried the memory of the battle away, scattering it into the endless land. Inside, in the warmth of the firelight, something stronger than survival was born: trust, family, and the beginning of a new life.